Well, I want to thank everybody and invite everybody to SoapBox. And I'm proud to have as my first guest a guy who I've followed shortly, but I've grown to admire as I've watched his work and everything. And just let me get to the introduction. Uh, Martin Lockett, glad to have you on the SoapBox.
So happy to be here, Rich.
Great.
It's truly an honor. I love what you're doing, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thank you very much. Now, listen, I wanted to start off this thing by saying the first thing that came to my head. It says, and I asked you who you were and what you did. You wrote down there, substance abuse counselor. And I said to myself, wow, this guy is like so much more than a substance abuse counselor. But hey, you got to get a label. You got to get a label, right? But you do so much more. I noticed public speaking, author, and it goes on and on. So, and I just want to tell everybody that one of the main things I want to harp on is let you guys know that this guy is a public speaker, a great public speaker, and some of the subjects that he talks about is so relevant that I'm going to press you guys. You need to book him because what he's talking about is real. He's talking real stuff. Martin, welcome to the SoapBox again. Step right in there and give me the cliff notes about who Martin is and what he's about.
Yes, sir. So you're right. I'm a little bit more than a substance abuse counselor. And it was a long, windy road that kind of got me here. I didn't set out, when you're 6, 7 years old and they ask you, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I wanted to be an architect.
Right.
It was so happened that my life circumstances that got me involved with alcohol around age 14, 15. And then eventually a very lengthy period of incarceration because of my alcoholism led me into this work as a way to honor my victims, and we can kind of unpack that a little bit later. But just to kind of flesh it out, I'm a public safety speaker, particularly on all things DUI related, substance abuse prevention, and mental health, but primarily warning the public about the dangers, the irreversible consequences to drinking and driving stemming from addiction. And so the reason why I am, quote unquote, an authority on that matter is because I actually spent 17 and a half years in prison for DUI manslaughter, where 2 people were tragically taken from this earth. And the irony in my case was that the 2 people that lost their lives that night on New Year's Eve of 2003 were actually in recovery themselves at the time of the crash.
Right.
And so it was just an ironic thing that happened. And the columnist who had written the article, he said, perhaps the person they will have ended up helping the most is the man who's charged with killing them. And so I said, in order for this tragedy to not be in vain and to remain a simple tragedy, I have to carry on these people's legacies and make it my life's mission to do everything I can to help people who are struggling in addiction and to prevent them from getting behind the wheel of a car and possibly doing the same catastrophic thing.
Okay, very good. Martin, okay, got that little cliff note now. So when I was starting, and the main point of this show is to give people an opportunity to really get on the soapbox and tell me about your main issues, and so you can drive some issues home. We won't take long, but I want you to drive these issues home. And first of all, I appreciate you doing it here. So, Martin, I'm telling you, get up on the soapbox. Get up on the soapbox from right now. I'm going to shoot these issues out to you and kind of give them to me one at a time, your feelings on them. The first thing I want to ask you about is not drinking and driving. Give me how you feel about that and what your main points about that are.
So drinking and driving. So first of all, alcohol is it's the most prevalent, substance aside from cigarettes, nicotine. It's the most prevalent substance in our society that we're okay with, right? I mean, doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects, firemen, policemen, everybody drinks. I can't say everybody drinks, but a lot of people drink, right? Yeah. And it's also very, very common that if you're coming from a party or the bar or a concert or whatever the case, and you've been drinking probably a little too much, everybody makes it okay. Most people make it okay to get behind the wheel because, I'm just going a mile up the road. I'm just going 2 miles up the road. My house is around the corner. And so they make it okay to drink and drive.
Right.
And, this leads to tens of thousands of preventable deaths every year, right? Every year this happens. And so the main thing for me, because after this happened, and I'm in the county jail, and I'm looking at 2 counts of manslaughter in the first degree, and I'm looking at 20 years in prison day for day based on the sentencing laws. And I'm watching the news, and on the news was my fatal collision, right? It just happened the night before. And I'm experiencing deja vu because I'm listening to the coverage, but I'm kind of zoning out. And it felt like deja vu because it felt like I had been here before, even though I wasn't here before, obviously. But I was recollecting all the newspaper articles, right, that I had read over the years, but this had happened to somebody. And I'm recollecting the plethora of news coverage where I had seen this same thing had happened to so many people before me, but yet I had managed to delude myself and convince myself that this could never happen to me, right? That this only happens to lightweight drinkers who can't control their alcohol. It doesn't happen to me because I'm smarter than that. I'm better than that. I know what I'm doing. And it just is absolutely asinine to believe that.
Right.
It is. So that's point number one. As far as drinking and driving. And the main thing that when I go speak, I just spoke at an alcohol safety class yesterday. And I speak at conferences, and depending on whether I'm speaking to law enforcement who are DUI, specialists, drug recognition experts, if I'm speaking to first and second time DUI offenders, if I'm speaking, in high schools or whatever the case, the message is gonna somewhat vary. But ultimately, the plan, the thing I cannot stress enough. Okay. I'm not there to tell people that they can't drink. What you do is your business. Now, I would advise that if there's some issues with the law or your marriage or your job or your personal affairs with drinking, then you should probably seek some professional help at the very least, or at least a support group, a 12-step meeting or something like that. But aside from all that, if you drink, fine, have it your way. But the minute you take to the streets, while drunk, then it becomes a public issue. It now becomes my problem, right? When you do behind closed doors or in a bar, or whatever, that's your issue. You take it out to the public, now we all have a problem. So my thing is, if you know you're going to be out drinking, simply make sure you have a plan in place for how you're going to get home before you do so. Because the minute you start drinking, your judgment goes, your reactivity time is out the window, your motor skills are compromised. It's too late to start thinking about making the right decisions at that point, right? Yeah. So have a plan in place for how you're going to get home before you start drinking. And secondly, if you are with someone who has been drinking entirely too much, you know they shouldn't be driving. It's your responsibility to ensure that they don't. And honestly, I don't care if you have to wrestle them to the ground and take their keys. You need to do that. They will thank you in the morning, but do not let them get behind the wheel, and do not let them end up like me and countless others who have given 17 and a half years in prison, 20 years in prison, 35 years in prison for one night of fun.
Exactly.
Don't let that happen.
Exactly. Very well said. And I like that you stress it because it's more than just important. It's critical. And sometimes the price to pay, as you can well, attest to, the price to pay can be outrageous. No one, you got to think about that. Second part on the soapbox. Tell me about how you feel, and I love this one. We're all redeemable. What do you mean by that? What points are you making with that?
Absolutely. Well, so for me, I started drinking when I was 14, and I started to get into some, criminal mischief, hang around with guys, trying to be cool, trying to fit in. Started going to juvenile detention hall when I was 15, 16 years old, got put on probation, ended up actually going to prison at 19 for a little over 3 years for an armed robbery that I committed with them. Again, trying to fit in and be like, see, I wasn't raised this way, right? And I'm not making excuses and I'm not minimizing, but this is not what my parents instilled in me. I come from a 2-parent household, hardworking parents. They loved us to death. We were not neglected. We were not abused. We were, for the modest means that we had, we lived a good childhood.
And Martin,
and so,
Martin, I
yes.
want you to really express what you just said, because I talked to you about this before. So many times when you're giving these messages, some people want to think that, well, it's because of the terrible upbringing or the terrible life. But I would stress that that's not necessarily the case.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, the neighborhood we lived in was not the greatest, but my parents shielded us. I have a twin brother and two older sisters, and they shielded us with love and nurturing and, guidance and just good parental, skills. And so we never felt that our needs were not being met. We never felt that there was not love and concern and all these things. Like we genuinely had those things. It was my own doing that when I became of age and wanted to, appeal to a certain crowd, that I started to go astray and do the things that I wanted to do, and my parents just couldn't tame me at that point, because Dad was working shift, the 2 to 11 shift, I forget, a swing shift, and Mom's health started to deteriorate, and so I was just running the streets and doing whatever I wanted to do. And that's what ultimately led me to prison twice, right? Had nothing to do with the way that my parents raised me. They did the best they knew how, and it was great. So with that, to go back to the everybody's redeemable is because, having, had all, been on probation 14, 15, 16 and going to jail and getting kicked out of school for being drunk, right, in class and passing out and selling weed, getting caught and getting harder sanctions with the system. And at 19, going to prison for 3.5 years and getting out, and then 2 years later committing this DUI offense that got me 17.5 years, right? Most people will look at that and say, this guy's a lost cause.
Right.
There's no hope for this guy, right? Just right. And we do that with so many people who are incarcerated. We write them off. We throw the book at them and we put them underneath the jail and we move on and say, that's somebody else's problem to deal with whenever they get out, if they get out. And we write them off. And I'm just saying that anybody and everybody is redeemable, especially young people who has lost their way and succumb to addiction and crime and just these things that get us in a lot of trouble. If there is the proper interventions, constructive interventions, proper guidance by parents and adults in their lives and community members, and it's just a belief. When you believe in a young person, you give them a reason to believe in themselves. Exactly. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
And so we have to nurture that. I've seen so many turnaround stories of people who I was incarcerated with who are out and doing fantastic things because they had in the system, they got the proper guidance and corrective interventions and things like that. But it shouldn't have to come to once they get locked up, then we want to intervene. There should be much more intervention in the community that can guide them out of those destructive patterns.
Exactly. And as I've told you before, my background is corrections with some substance abuse. And I can't stress that what you're saying is exactly true. When you see it on the end that I saw, you always see the individual. By the time you see them, they have already been arrested. But in all those close conversations and getting to know an individual, and especially seeing them when they are frightened and scared without the bravado, you see that many people are not only redeemable, but worth redeeming,
Absolutely.
Worth redeeming. And you do see that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and that's cool. All right. Soapbox item number 3. Doing recovery in community and not in isolation. I like that. I like that. The whole basis for meeting and talking, but how do you see that? And how do you apply that?
Well, because there's so many things that we have to grapple with in recovery. And a lot of them are internal triggers that we deal with. It's not about just people, places, and things to stay away from. Those are kind of the easy ones.
Right.
But it's when we are alone and we have these feelings of whether it be sadness or grief or anger or frustration or embarrassment or hurt or agony, whatever it is, those are all triggers for a lot of us, right? They are. And so if I'm trying to just go it alone and just power through, just have the willpower to just stay strong and stand firm. If I don't have anybody to be able to process things with, to be able to talk things through with, to be able to get some support from and get some validation and get some empathy, I'm telling you, I'm setting myself up for failure. I'm setting myself up for a relapse.
Exactly.
And so it's a reason why the model of, and again, there's so many different ways to do it in community, but the 12-step model, which is, group based, right? Where people
Right.
congregate wherever they are. A lot of it is online now, being, due to the pandemic.
Right.
But people having fellowship with one another and taking
Exactly.
their problems to the group and getting support and getting feedback and, just knowing that they're not alone. That's enough to get a lot of people through really difficult, challenging times that will oftentimes prevent a relapse from happening. And so, you can only go so far, I think, if you
Right.
try to do this thing, this recovery thing by yourself, and eventually it's going to become too overwhelming, and you're going to give in. You're going to give in. So you have to be connected with other people, and that's how we kind of draw on each other's strengths, and that's how we do this thing together.
Okay. Very, very good. Martin, and going over and looking at your website, and I said I was going to come back to this, and I'm back to it right now. You give some specific talks, and I want to let people know what they're going to get. When they allow themselves to be helped by your presence and your knowledge. And you've got some talks, and I'm going to mention them here, and I want you to kind of give us a real cliffy note of a little piece of what they're going to get. Okay. The first talk is the power of positive thinking. Give me your take on that. How you feel about that?
Right. Well, right. So going through 17 and a half years in prison, right? Most people would look at that and say, there's no way I could possibly do that. I would just go crazy. It would eat me alive. There's no way I can do that. But because I chose to not allow my mind to become incarcerated, even though my body was, right? My mind was free, but I chose that, right? I chose that way of looking at it. And I always looked at it, always was forward thinking. And even though
Right.
I'm in here, how can I turn this negative into a positive? How can I turn this tragedy into triumph? Right? What key lessons are there to be learned through this difficulty? Because if I only look at the difficulty of the situation, I'm going to miss so many invaluable life lessons that I could have learned along the way. We don't just go through hardship for the sake of just going through hardship, right?
Exactly.
I don't think we go through hardship to be punished by our creator or whatever your beliefs are. I think that we go through hardships because there is some underlying invaluable life lesson that we are to extract from that, right? But it starts with the reframing of the way you're looking at it in order for you to receive
Right.
it.
Right.
And so it's just there's so much power in the way that we look at things and our perspectives and kind of our worldviews that will determine how we ultimately come out of something on the other end, if we're worse off because of it or if we're better off because of it. And so I say the power of positive thinking is your best friend, but you have to employ it when it matters the most, which is usually when the situation is the harshest.
I love how you put that, because in my opinion, positive thinking and intentionally positive thinking. In other words,
Right.
not just being rah-rah, but intentionally, like you said, make up your mind, take a direction, and be positive with that direction, but intentionally doing. I love how you said that.
That's
Your
right.
other talk, choices and consequences for young adults. And as you know, that's my wheelhouse and background, working with the families of young adults. Tell me how you would talk to them. Tell me how you would speak to them about their choices and the consequences of their choices.
Right. So I just came from Portland. I spoke to middle school kids and a few high school kids, but mainly middle school kids. And I gave that talk there.
Okay.
And, I take them through the choices that I made when I was 14, 15, 16 that ultimately led to consequences now at 44 years old that I'm actually technically still paying for, because it was taking that first drink when I was 14. It
Right.
was skipping that first class, at 15. It was smoking that first joint, when I was 16, that ultimately led to me being, an alcoholic and somebody who struggled with drug addiction and not graduating high school and being more susceptible to going to prison than going to college, right? Those choices at that age led to these consequences 30 years down the road. And so, I just get them to, think about the people that they're hanging around, because we all look up to people at that age and we want to be like this guy, and we're jealous of this person because they have all the girls, they have this. And I say, think about the people that you're hanging around and the things that they do, and ask yourself if those things that they do, if they align with what you want out of life. Because I can promise you the choices you make today will have a direct impact on where you will find yourself when you're 30 and 40 and 50. And so make sure that what you're doing today coincides with what you want out of life tomorrow.
Exactly. That's very well said. Very well said. This last one, and I love this one especially. This is good. Recovery is when you begin life. Talk to me about that one.
Absolutely.
I haven't heard this talk, but I'm going to hear it eventually.
Right. So I'll tell you. So the first 12 years of my incarceration, I hadn't drank anything. I've been working on my studies, psychology, sociology. I'm starting to really unravel all of, kind of the origins of my addiction and my problematic behavior and when things start to go off the rails for me. And so I assumed that I was in recovery, right? I hadn't drank. I'm learning all this good stuff and getting degrees, but I was just sober. I wasn't in recovery. You know what I mean? And so recovery, and so it's the, not to get too complex, but I can sum it up in the biopsychosocial spiritual model of recovery, right? So so we think about biology. So when we're in our addiction, we're putting chemicals in our body. We're not sleeping well. We're not eating right. We're not exercising. We're really doing a number on our physiology. Psychologically, we're numbing ourselves with the drugs and alcohol. So we're not processing our feelings. We're not regulating our emotions. We're not talking through our problems. We're not doing counseling, group therapy, anything like that. Socially, when we're in our addiction, at least when I was in my addiction, I wasn't hanging around the right people, doing the right things. I kept bad company, and I didn't know what a healthy boundary looked like, and it smacked me in the face. And spiritually, I was bankrupt. And so if those are all the things that were compromising my addiction, it would only make sense if in my recovery, I gave direct attention to all of those things, those four critical aspects of myself, to just kind of, revitalize life and to live life. And so now that I try to eat well, I exercise, I go jogging, I have workout equipment in my basement. I try to get adequate sleep. I'm not putting chemicals in my body. I feel great, right? Psychologically, I know how to process my emotions. I talk to my partner. If something's going on, I do AA. I process things there. I work as a drug and alcohol counselor. So I'm, kind of talking to myself and I'm talking to the clients. Socially, I definitely know how to set healthy boundaries today with people and maintain good, positive relationships. And then spiritually, I'm connected to my higher power. And so I feel that because, that's my recovery. Right. And for the first time in my life at 44 years old, and for the past couple of years that I've been out, I feel like I'm actually living to the person that Martin was meant to be, who I really am. Right. I'm steadfast and my principles and my value system is in order and my priorities in order. Everything was out of whack when I was in my addiction. Right. And even through the first 12 years of my incarceration, even though I hadn't drank, I still hadn't figured this part of me out. Right. My identity, who I really am and what my purpose is. So that's what I say, once you really start to put these building blocks of your recovery in place and you build that foundation, then you really start to live. That's when you really start to, feel fulfilled and purposeful, and you have a meaningful life, and you look forward to the day, and you got a lot to offer, and you get validation in return. Right. Oh, it's a beautiful thing, man. It's a beautiful thing.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Martin, you got any projects going now? What are some of the things that you're actually doing and involved in? Give me a few. I know you're doing it, but give me a couple things.
Yes. So the main thing, I mean, my main, my 9 to 5, if you will, that's working as a counselor and working on the mental health crisis line, which I thoroughly enjoy. It's very heavy. People struggling with suicidal ideation, self-harm, things like that. So I get to meet them where they are and get them through the day, and then get them connected with resources. But my passion, my absolute passion, is public speaking. And so, for instance, like I said, I just came back from Portland speaking to kids. I did my first law enforcement conference in Oregon, in Southern Oregon, a couple months ago in April, and it was just so validating to hear see officers come up to me afterwards and shake my hand and thank me for sharing my story and things like that. I'm involved with the Pennsylvania DUI Association, doing a couple conferences with them. I am going on a 5-college tour in New York in September.
Okay.
With the Save a Life tour, and they go into colleges and high schools around the country, and they bring these big simulators so kids can get inside and feel what it feels like to drive impaired or to drive distracted or to be speeding. And then I present my story to them, and I've spoken in a couple of high schools, and I got a panel tonight, a remote panel, also out of Oregon that I do once a month. And so it's just, really, really getting my message out there. And I've got a few more conferences coming up later this year with the drug treatment courts here in Pennsylvania as well. And then a couple others. So that's been really, really fun. And I just continue to learn and grow, like even in my public speaking and different audiences and kind of tailoring your message a little bit, even though it's my story, but I tailored it a little differently.
Right.
And so it's all been a process and a journey, and I'm going for the ride. I'm riding the wave, man.
Hey, my question for you. So you're speaking. Are you a natural public speaker? I can tell you're natural, but had you take some training for it? Have you worked on it? What have you done with that?
I did. So I'm not a natural public speaker. I was an incredibly shy kid, just in a room full of 5 people. Like I didn't know how to find the right words to say.
Right.
Which is why I also started drinking when I was 14, just to loosen up and feel comfortable in social settings. Right. It was when I was incarcerated and I got my first degree, my associates, and they asked me to speak at the graduation. And of course, I'm like, oh my God, I knew they were going to ask me. Why are they asking me this?
Right.
But I am so fixated on giving a really good performance when I do these things that I wrote everything down and I memorized it word for word, verbatim. So I was going to get up there, not forget what I was going to say, because if I memorize it, it's there, right? That's one thing about me. I have an impeccable memory. So I said, I'm going to memorize this thing, and I'm going to go, and I went up there and I did it, and it felt great. And then after that, I said, okay, this public speaking thing might work, but I got to really sharpen my skills. So I did Toastmasters. They were offering Toastmasters inside, the international organization for public speaking. They had a local branch coming in, and so I did a few speeches in there and learned some things, and then I kind of went off from there. And then they would have me speak at these GED graduations and the college graduations inside the prison, and then I started telling my story at the DUI victim impact panels within the prison. So before I even got out, there was a lot of practice with speaking, different audiences, different speeches, and things like that.
All right. The work paid off. Work paid off.
It did. It did indeed.
Now, the youth and law enforcement panels, is that something that you directly work with? Any particular groups of law enforcement or any particular places, or is this general? How's that work?
So this one came about. So I was referred by. So I spoken at a youth panel in Oregon, and then the woman who runs that youth panel, she said every year there's a law enforcement conference for DUI prevention in Oregon. Big conference, 500 people, and from all over the state, and actually from a few other states as well. And so she said, I want to refer you to speak if you're okay with it. And I'm like, of course, that'd be great.
Right.
So she submitted my name, and they had gone online and saw my videos on YouTube, and they said, yeah, we definitely like what this guy has to say. So then they, presented a contract, and it was, it worked out from there. And then this next one coming up with the Pennsylvania DUI Association, I had spoken at another youth conference in December. And then the guy who had put that on, he referred me to the Pennsylvania DUI Association. I reached out to them. They got back to me. I met with them in person, and they do a law enforcement training every year, and so they're gonna have me do that one in November, and I just did one with them in May for a DUI panels coordinators conference. So,
okay, very good. Well, you know, Martin, most of the places that I'm going to be showing the soapbox is going to be in places where there are other recovery personnel involved. Um, I believe that the main point of the soapbox is to get the different aspects of recovery people together to see what each other is doing. Because sometimes we get pigeonholed and we get the one view. Because sometimes when I talk to the physicians, they're thinking one way, the therapists are thinking another way. You know, I got clergy involved. I'm trying to get everybody involved. So I want to say again, you guys, you see what we got on the screen, martinlockett.com. You must visit it. You must look at it. It's almost mandatory that you do that if you want to help us further the recovery, especially of young adults, and reduce the grieving of families. Um,
Right.
Quick commercial for me, secondstarts.com, number 2, NDSTARTS.com, helping the families and support network of young adults in recovery by installing a permanent self-refueling transformation starting from day one, without the guilt and shame of most recovery processes. And we do this by identifying and customizing and strengthening the relationships between the client, his support system, and the professional helpers. Martin, before we sign off, you know I got to get my questions in. And I asked you before, what's your favorite color?
Favorite color is red.
Okay, our favorite color is red. And I asked you about that, your favorite movie, which I thought was an interesting choice, Martin, I got to tell you.
Yes. I think I said Training Day.
You did say Training Day.
I did say Training Day.
Training Day.
Denzel cannot make a bad movie, first of all. Let's just start there. He can't make a bad movie. And that one was just so out of his element, and he just delivered. Oh, it was just so good all the way through.
That's the one that make you, if you really met Denzel, you had to keep an eye on it. You know what I mean? I know you're a nice guy. I know you're a nice guy, but maybe you're not. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah. And last of all, that favorite food. What's your favorite food?
Oh, did I say enchiladas?
You said, you know what? I didn't make a note of it because I didn't want to set my mind on it. I wanted to hear it again. So if it's I know it was you might have said lasagna.
I think I said lasagna. That's where I was going next. That's
where I was going. You might have said lasagna.
So lasagna is 1A and enchiladas is 1B.
Oh, okay. All right. Again, Martin, I want to thank you again. And like I say, everybody, if you don't get in touch with this guy, you're making a mistake for your organization or anything that you're trying to do. Martin, again, thank you very much for being on the Soapbox.
It was totally my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.
Great. Okay. Take care, sir. And I'll be talking to you shortly.
Sounds good.